education for the future, the emerging paradigm of thrivable education. And there's a little bit of, also, if you want to find out more about me, there's a dedicated website at alexanderlaszlo.net. All right. So we did take a minute. That was me playing the flute. I just put that in there as a reminder and a remembering already of the dynamics that we're engaging in, music being that universal language that brings us into being. And we'll talk about that in our educational frame as well. So what is the moment that we are living in right now? Well, this quote was written over 165 years ago. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of life, of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair, right? I mean, what a perfect, I think, description of the time we're living in now as well. The thing to recognize is that it often seems like this is the description of the moment. And as Art Buchwald says, whether it's the best of times or the worst of times, it's the only time we've got. So how do we cope with this, and how do we have an educational system that prepares us for these kind of times? Well, they have been described as VUCA, RUPT, and BANI. What are these things? First of all, my colleague Tom Attlee will describe it beautifully. He says that things are getting worse and worse and better, faster and faster. So I think it's not bad as a description of things. But what that means is we get caught up in a whirlwind of change, of dynamics around us that it's hard to make sense of. So the acronym VUCA, the scientists often will use this. It's been around for a little while. They talk about contexts and situations that are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, hard to navigate. In the social sciences, it's more often talked about as RUPT. That is, things appear rapid, unpredictable, paradoxical, and tangled. It's hard to figure out what's going on. It's hard to make sense of it. And more recently, also, there is the sense that life and reality are brittle, that there's a sense of being anxious, and that the dynamics are nonlinear and incomprehensible. BANI is the acronym here. What's interesting to note is that all these acronyms, VUCA, RUPT, BANI, there are others, TUNA is another one, and it doesn't matter. They all are different ways that have appeared recently in our lexicon to signify that we are living in a time where we're trying to describe how chaotic it seems, how rapid, unpredictable, paradoxical, and tangled life seems now. What kind of education system do we need to be able to deal with that? Well, clearly, it's a time to innovate new educational vehicles for lifelong, life-wide, and life-deep learning. And we mentioned these three because lifelong learning, well, we know that lifelong learning is not just pedagogy for children or andragogy for adults, as Malcolm Knowles would talk about, but it's pandragogy. It is ways of learning that encourage and engage people in their lifelong learning. Not that I get my degree, I can stop learning, I'm done. Life-wide learning is you learn everywhere and anywhere, not just in the classroom. Because life-shallow learning is learning in the classroom, that's all. Can we foster life-wide learning as well? And life deep is connecting to those things which are sacred. Perhaps even to those things that we might want to say are related to love. We need this more and more in our times. Traditional brick and mortar schools with fixed learning environments like classrooms and siloed subject matter courses, disciplines that are separated out with standardized one-size-fits-all learning modalities are not up to the task of preparing learners for life in a VUCA or RUPT or BANI world. So this is what we have to explore. What then? How do we innovate? How do we innovate in times like this? I'm not going to give you the answers here because this is for us to explore together, but I can at least set the stage for some of the things that we might wish to consider. For instance, you know about STEM, the focus that we have in mainstream educational initiatives to focus on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, right? And that's the idea, that this is what we need to do to strengthen our educational systems. Recently, it's been updated beautifully to be STEAM. And I like this because STEAM includes the A for the arts. So science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And this is all forms of arts. It means the performing arts, the literary arts, the visual arts, media arts, all forms, right? So that's beautiful that we bring this form of arts and makes us, I think, come more into the ability to human well. Yeah. But that's not, I think, where we all have to stop. We need to have STREAM. What is STREAM? STREAM is science, technology, relational intelligence, engineering, arts, and mathematics. How do we relate to each other better? This is relational intelligence. But it's not just to each other, it's to ourselves. Relating to ourselves better. What is our self-talk? Are we kind to ourselves? To each other? What about with nature? What's our dialogue with nature? Are we stepping on nature's toes, or is this something we're doing beautifully and interactively? So, and then also the relational intelligence includes our dialogue, our conversation with our ancestors. We just had that in a previous session, the importance of being in conversation with our ancestors. And also recognizing that we are future ancestors now. We are ancestors in training. So how are we in relationship with future beings, our descendants, not just human beings, but descendants of all forms of life in now? So relational intelligence, I think, is key to our educational systems for dealing with the Vulcabani world and Rupt world. All right, let's move ahead. So this guy with the bad hair day said beautifully that the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. And again, this is paraphrased from an interview that Bob Samples did with him, but so it's not a direct quote, but it comes from the work of Bob Samples. So he wrote about Einstein saying this, and this idea of the intuitive mind. How much is that being cultivated in our educational systems? If that is the sacred gift and the rational mind is the faithful servant, what are we doing in our educational systems, right? As he says over here, we have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Another great thinker and inspirational human being, Buckminster Fuller, he said, well, let me put the full quote out here. He says, I live on earth at present. He was asked, what is he? What is he? He says, I live on earth at present and I don't know what I am. I know that I'm not a category. I'm not a thing, a noun. I seem to be a verb, an evolutionary process, an integral function of the universe. How do we get to that kind of insight, of expression? We tend to be always thinking, I am a noun. I am a teacher. I am a nurse. I am a firefighter, whatever. And it puts us in a box, in a category. How can we human well? Verbing ourselves into our integral function of the universe, an expression of the universe in the now. What kind of educational system helps us do that? I'm going to suggest that perhaps one of the goals here is collective intelligence. In fact, maybe the next stage in human evolution is collective intelligence. But what do we need to get there? To have collective intelligence, to be true expressions so that we're not just these siloed individuals and who continue to develop along the lines of our Western priorities and values that foster strident individualism and self-righteous independence. That's not the way that ecosystems flourish. They flourish through interdependence, right? So what do we need? First, before collective intelligence, we need connective intelligence. And connective intelligence is that ability to know with whom to connect in order to engage in the next dialogue or in the next learning activity or whatever it is, but not just with whom, but with what information, with what data, but also with what resources, what places, what life. How do we connect with life? This is connective intelligence, and it's a precursor to collective intelligence. But there's another precursor even before connective intelligence that we must also, and I'm going to say must, because I really feel this is important for our educational systems to move with this. And that is empathetic intelligence. These are the care why competencies and the ability hmm, to be not just sympathetic with others and say, oh, wow, that must be hard, but to really sit with, even in silence, the experience of another. And this is not just about compassion, because compassion, I think, is important, but usually it is for somebody's struggle. You're compassionate for somebody who has difficulty. Empathy can be with somebody who has great joy as well. That's important to celebrate and see someone else when they are performing well in their school, when they're doing excellently, and then to sit with them and celebrate with exuberance with them too. So empathy is in the good and the difficult times. Empathetic intelligence, sorely lacking in our schools today, especially when it's only focused on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. How do we move to interbeing first, and then maybe even to this notion of intrabeing that Taekwon-do so beautifully expresses? So Thich Nhat Hanh has talked about interbeing. He says, learning to human well. He doesn't say this, but this is a part of it. Learning to human well means learning to be danced into form as a greater delicious intra-being. And I put that expression delicious because it should be yummy. It should be a sense of I am part of something bigger than myself, not lost in this bigger thing, but held, embraced, loved. Does school do that? That's a big question. Wendy Wheeler, in her beautiful book called The Whole Creature, talks about the murmuration of starlings, or the schooling of fish, or the herding of ungulate like deers and hoofed animals. They move together as one. You know, when you see a murmuration of starlings, a flock of these birds at night, or in the evening rather, it looks like they're one being, and they don't rehearse this, right? And they move so fast in such high densities, and they don't bump into it. You never see two birds bumping into each other and falling out of the sky. You don't see that. And they don't have to put their blinkers on to tell if they're going left or right. They are moving as one. This is collective intelligence. But it's the collective intelligence of a non-reflective type, we think. It's simply being truly attuned to the moment. In Spanish, we would say in sintonía, which is a beautiful way of expressing the kind of dynamic harmony, right? Aldo Leopold says that to do this kind of thing, to be a murmuration, we have to learn to think like a mountain. It's the name of a book of his. It's a classical book already by now. What does that mean to think like a mountain? Do we even, I mean, if we brought that into a school, they would say, what are you, crazy? Think like mountains don't think. Well, yes, they do if we can empathize with them as larger expressions of life. And it doesn't mean thinking like a human being thinking like a mountain. No, that's not what we're saying. It is, what is it, the experience of mountaining and of their changing over time, right? Not describing human volition, but a different form of being, right? How do we learn that? That can help us with the empathetic intelligence and help us to human well. What would it take for us to think and sense like Gaia, like all of the planet? Can we do that? And are schools preparing us to even begin to think about that? So the questions here are, how can I make myself available to intra-be? The difference simply between interbeing and intra-being is, Thich Nhat Hanh talks about how we can come together to form a larger being, the interbeing that arises among us when we are well connected, in syntony, in sintonia. But the intra-being that Bayo Akomolafe and Karen Barad and a few others talk about already exists. It pre-exists. Our ground state is interconnectedness. Our ground state, we are born into community, always. And when we can recognize that we're always part of this co-emergence, not the strident individualism and the self-righteous independence of our Western world, but the Ubuntu forms of being, of our interdependence, then we can perhaps move into this question, start to answer this question. Wouldn't it be great if we brought this into schools? How can we make ourselves available to be danced into form as a greater, delicious intra-being? All right. What are some practices? So some of the things I like to do to begin to make sense of this, to intra-be a bit better, is to first get out of my own way. Often I'm fine, I'm in my own, because I'm planning, I'm thinking, I'm not listening. So the first step is to listen, to allow myself to be informed. So I must get out of my own way first. And then to connect, like we did at the beginning of the session when the flute was playing, or when the flute was playing me, it's a good way of saying it. And then to sense what is seeking to emerge. That's your empathetic intelligence right there. Not empathy with necessarily just another human being, but what is seeking to emerge in this moment? What is that expression of beauty and of grace? And then to flow, to align with the pulse of change that is life affirming, future creating, and opportunity increasing. So to stop, connect, and flow. Wonderful practices that we can bring into educational systems at all moments, right? It doesn't have to be just in higher education. It doesn't have to be in kindergarten, but we can do this even there. And of course, there's the question, but what about artificial intelligence? Oh my God. I'm going to mention this briefly here because my concern is this is such a focus of angst and concern now. I'll be happy to talk about it, but my real concern is that the real danger is not that computers begin to think like humans, but that humans will begin to think like computers. And I think when we forget the need for the empathetic intelligence, when we focus only on efficiency, effectiveness, efficacy, when we're looking at science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and we forget about the arts, we forget about relational intelligence, then we begin to computer well. We're not humaning well anymore. And I see that happening a lot. I think if we human well, we would never pick up a weapon. But that's just me being Alexander. But there is hope in this crazy VUCA time. And I'm going to quote from The Lord of the Rings because J.R.R. Tolkien is a hero of mine. So I want to just quote from The Two Towers. And there's this conversation between two of the characters, principal characters. Frodo is at the end of his wits. He doesn't know how to continue. It's just too much. He says, I can't do this, Sam. And Sam, his companion, says, I know, it's all wrong. By rights, we shouldn't even be here, but we are. It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered, full of darkness and danger they were. Those were the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folks in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't, because they were holding on to something. And Frodo asked, what are we holding on to, Sam? Sam says that there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. So for me, this is what is to be remembered. And again, the fight is not necessarily the combat, but it's to stand up, to support, to connect, to empower, to curate that goodness in contexts that are educational. That's what we're looking at right here. How can we do this? So Eric Jans talks about how to live in an evolutionary spirit means to engage with full ambition and without any reserve in the structure of the present, and yet to let go and flow into a new structure when the right time has come. So don't get stuck. The short expression here is don't get, but engage with all of yours. Don't give up, but don't get stuck. That's what I think the zeitgeist is calling for. Don't give up, but don't get stuck. and be ready to flow. Listen to what is seeking to emerge. What is seeking to emerge with heart? Wait, where is the path with heart? Okay, this is, I think, maybe almost my last slide, and then we can move into more interactive part of this session here. It's a little heavy because I'm going to go through 6 competencies of the evolutionary learner. What is it that I feel we can cultivate in ourselves and in each other, in our schooling situations, in our educational systems? Well, first is a kind of personal evolution, a commitment to expanding and intensifying our own consciousness, engaging in lifelong learning, becoming an active observer, defining our role as participatory life weavers. Wow. If that's what we would get when we graduate from a school, I think we would have a good orientation if people feel, hey, this is my role as a participatory life weaver. And what do we need? We need to also become capable of working with emotions and language. So becoming aware of narratives around us, of the vocabularies and speech acts that we use to affect change. How do we talk about things, people? Do we say, when we say that somebody is, that this is really good, we say, oh, wow, that's the bomb. That's an expression to say it's really cool. Or when we talk about the horrors of nuclear war, we talk about a nuclear exchange. It sounds like Christmas time. I mean, we don't get into we need to have language that captures the horror, the violence. So not neutral in the way in which we express our engagement with such things as, for example, nuclear warfare. So facilitating effective communication to enable relational intelligence, And this means thinking in terms of emergence, understanding patterns of change, interconnectedness, and the dynamics of synergy in complex adaptive systems, which is you and me, complex adaptive systems. This is life, an ecosystem. All these things are simply changing over time in ways that are interbeing and interdependent. And then what we do, what we bring into the world means applying this kind of understanding of emergence and the language and emotions and our sense of our role of participatory life weavers, applying systemic sustainability principles and practices, creating solutions to economic, social, and cultural and environmental problems, the things that are defining our VUCA world, by designing living, learning ecosystems of which we're a part. We don't have to design the trees and forests, no, but we have to design the thrivable urban environments, for example, the living cities. There's a beautiful initiative called Living Cities Earth and the Living Cities Earth Action Research Ecosystem. Initiatives already existing in the world. So now then, this means collaboration and innovation. We can't do this alone. Collective intelligence, connective first and then collective, bringing people together, harvesting diversity, engaging in conversations that translate vision into action, creating evolutionary learning communities, and innovating for the common good. Okay, if this is the orientation, perhaps even of higher educational institutions, right? Where you're learning how to be a doctor, how to be an engineer, etc. Innovating for the common good. And finally, the last one here is coherence and flow, keeping this in mind, that the bigger pattern of change in our cosmos is always one of flow. Cultivating evolutionarily informed intuition, from walking the talk to dancing the path, embodying a living systems consciousness. And the key is to do all of these 6 together. We're going to talk about intuition in just a moment, and I'll show you a little video, and that'll be the way we end this and move into our dynamic together. Well, here it is. Yep. All right. Now I'm going to, you know what? I forgot to put on the sound capacity here. So I'm going to have to stop this, and then I'm going to start this again. But let me see if I can, okay, wait 1 second while I it's good to drink your coffee, take a moment here while I get the technology to work and we bring ourselves into this little video that I want to open the link. That way we can come back to it afterwards. And Here it is. Let me just get it set for you before we get it running. It's loading. There we are. Okay, and now make it full screen over here, and then hopefully. Okay, 1 second. Aha! So I need to not do it like this. 1 second. I'm still working on getting the video running for you. Okay. And then there we are. Okay. So now I will share this with you. Let's go to Zoom. Let's go to share screen. Paul, apologies for this, but watch this video. Actually, the sound is not all that important, but it's very, very cool. I need to share the other screen. Sorry. This is, yeah, that's the one I want. Okay, here we are. Nope, because I didn't put the sound on yet. Sorry. Now we do share, and now we do optimize sound, and now we do this technology. Here we are. And well, okay, great. So now we're good. Everybody could hear that? Thumbs up and see it. Isn't that cool? Okay, I'm going to go now just to the last couple of slides here, just to wrap things up here. So now we are basically done. We've seen this, very cool. And I like this quote here. Whoops. This is from Joanna Macy, a wonderful teacher and mentor of mine as well. She says, because the relationship between self and world is reciprocal, it is not a matter of first getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we work to heal the earth heals us. No one need wait. I think very important because we often, I think, feel, well, wait, I have to get my degree, I have to graduate, I have to finish school, or I can't teach this yet because I don't know it. This is where this kind of intuition engagement, working with the world, ask the world. Ask the world. This is your Gaia sense. Remember that I was talking about that earlier. So I think this is the big part of our exploration. To be the systems you want to see in the world, to be the ecosystems, the educational systems, right? Not to wait for somebody to make them, but to be them together, the collective intelligence, connective intelligence, and pathetic intelligence. And so with this, I was going to take a moment with the flute, but I want to check in with everyone first. And then I have some questions for us to think about. I'm going to put them here and then take them off, and we'll bring them back in a moment. But just to let you know what the questions are that we can we're going to breakout rooms and we'll focus on these things, right? I'll read them to you and then we'll stop the sharing and then we'll do the breakout rooms for these questions after we do a general check-in. So, in what ways is education becoming more or less humanistic, empathetic, heart-centered, given trends towards increased reliance on technology. In your breakout room, you may want to talk about something else that comes from this session, and that's fine. But let's try to keep it focused on the session about thrivable education. How can we impact this trend, either if it's becoming more or less, depending on what you were talking about? And what are the keys to affecting this trend towards or away from becoming more humanistic, empathetic, and heart-centered? And how would you know if you were in a healthy or an unhealthy learning ecosystem? What are some markers? How would you know? Because I think there are a lot of them around. And I think that, my friends, is it for my presentation.